The clock on the wall showed 6:30 p.m. when David finally put down his wrench and wiped the grease from his hands. His small auto repair shop had been his life for the past 8 years, and he took pride in every job that came through those doors. Today had been no different. A customer's truck needed a complete transmission rebuild, and David wasn't the type to leave a job half-finished, even when the weather looked questionable. He glanced out the window and frowned. The light snow that had been falling all afternoon was getting heavier. Much heavier. The weather forecast that morning had called for just a few inches, nothing too serious for folks in Colorado who were used to winter storms. But something about this felt different. The wind was picking up and the snow was coming down sideways now. David pulled out his phone and checked the latest weather update. His heart sank as he read the emergency alert that had just come through. The National Weather Service had upgraded their forecast to a blizzard warning. Winds up to 60 miles per hour, temperatures dropping to 15 below zero. Up to 2 feet of snow expected overnight. Well, that's not good, he muttered to himself, shoving the phone back into his pocket. He walked around the shop, making sure everything was secure for the night. Tools went back in their proper places. The hydraulic lift was lowered. The space heater in his small office was turned down but left running in case the pipes froze. David had learned these routines the hard way during his first winter running the business. The shop sat on the edge of town, about 3 miles from the main highway. It wasn't the busiest location, but the rent was cheap, and David had built up a good reputation with locals who didn't mind driving a little extra for honest work at fair prices. Most days he loved the quiet setting. Tonight, as he listened to the wind howling around the building, he wondered if being so isolated was such a smart choice. David grabbed his heavy winter coat from the hook by the door and pulled it on. The thick brown jacket had seen better days, but it was warm and practical. He wrapped a wool scarf around his neck and pulled on his work boots. Growing up in Minnesota before his family moved to Colorado, he'd learned to respect winter weather. You prepared for the worst and hoped for the best. He stepped outside and immediately felt the full force of the storm. The wind hit him like a wall, and the snow stung his face despite the wool cap pulled down over his ears. His breath came out in thick white puffs that were instantly blown away. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees since he'd last been outside. David's pickup truck sat in its usual spot near the shop entrance. The red Ford had over 200,000 miles on it, but he kept it in perfect running condition. It had 4-wheel drive, good tires, and had never let him down in bad weather. He brushed the snow off the windshield and windows, already thick despite being parked for just a few hours. As he cleared the rear window, something caught his eye in the distance. Through the swirling snow, he could barely make out what looked like taillights on the highway. They seemed to be flickering, and the vehicle wasn't moving. David stopped brushing snow and squinted through the storm, trying to get a better look. The lights were definitely stationary, about half a mile down the road. In weather like this, that could only mean one thing. Someone was in trouble. David felt that familiar tug in his chest, the same feeling he'd had during his time in the Army, when he knew someone needed help. His wife Lisa always teased him about being unable to mind his own business when people were in distress. She said it came from his 2 tours overseas, where looking out for others wasn't just the right thing to do, it was a matter of survival. Climbed into his truck and started the engine, letting it warm up while he considered his options. The smart thing would be to drive straight home. Lisa was probably worried sick, and the roads were only going to get worse. Their own house was 15 miles away, mostly on back roads that would be nearly impossible to navigate if he waited much longer. But those taillights bothered him. In his 8 years running the shop, he'd seen what happened when people got stuck in storms like this. Cars ran out of gas, engines overheated, batteries died, and in temperatures this low, being stranded in a vehicle without heat could turn deadly fast. David reached for his phone to call Lisa, but there was no signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers, or at least weakened them enough that his phone couldn't connect. That made his decision easier. If he was having trouble with his phone, whoever was stuck out there probably couldn't call for help either. He put the truck in gear and slowly pulled out of the shop parking lot. The snow was already several inches deep, and his headlights could barely penetrate the wall of white in front of him. He drove carefully, knowing that one wrong move could put him in the ditch alongside whoever he was trying to help. The wind rocked his truck as he made his way down the highway. David had driven in plenty of snowstorms, but this was something else entirely. The snow wasn't just falling, it was flying horizontally, creating a whiteout that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. He followed the yellow line, in the middle of the road, using it as his guide. As he got closer to the stranded vehicle, David could see it was a small car, probably a sedan, sitting at an angle in what looked like a growing snowdrift. The hazard lights were flashing weakly, and he could see steam or smoke coming from under the hood. The car's windows were fogged up, but he thought he could make out shapes inside. David pulled his truck up behind the car, leaving his headlights on to provide some visibility. He grabbed a flashlight from his glove compartment and a heavy rope from the bed of his truck. The rope was something he always carried in winter, along with a shovel, jumper cables, and a basic toolkit. Being prepared wasn't just smart. It was necessary when you lived in country where help might be hours away. The wind nearly knocked him over as he stepped out of his truck. The snow was coming down so hard that he could barely see the stranded car, even though it was only 20 feet away. David pulled his scarf up over his nose and mouth and made his way carefully toward the vehicle. As he approached the driver's side window, he could see there were people inside. The windows were completely fogged up, but he could make out at least 2 or 3 figures. David knocked gently on the window, not wanting to startle whoever was inside. The window cracked open slightly, and David could see a woman's face, pale and frightened. Behind her, he could hear what sounded like children's voices. The woman looked scared, and David realized she probably couldn't see much of him through the storm and darkness. "Ma'am, my name is David," he called out over the wind. "I own the repair shop up the road. Are you folks okay in there?" The woman hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure whether to trust a stranger in the middle of a blizzard. David understood her caution. He stepped back a bit and shone his flashlight on his face so she could see him better, then pointed toward his work jacket with the shop logo. "Your car looks like it's overheated," he continued. "This storm's getting worse. You can't stay out here much longer." Through the crack in the window, David could hear children crying and the woman's voice, shaky with cold and fear. Whatever had brought this family out in weather like this, they were in serious trouble now. And David knew that helping them was no longer just the right thing to do. It was a matter of life and death. The woman in the car stared at David for what felt like forever, though it was probably only a few seconds. He could see her mind racing, trying to decide if she could trust this stranger who had appeared out of the storm. Behind her, David could hear 2 small voices, one crying and another asking, "Mommy, who is that man?" "How do I know you're really who you say you are?" the woman finally asked through the small crack in the window. Her voice was shaking. Whether from cold or fear, David couldn't tell. David understood her worry completely. Here she was, stranded with her children in the middle of nowhere during a dangerous storm, and some guy in a truck had just showed up. He would be suspicious too if he were in her shoes. "Fair question," David said, raising his voice so she could hear him over the wind. He pulled out his wallet and held his driver's license up to the window, shining his flashlight on it. "David, Chen, that's me. And here's my business card for the shop." He fumbled in his jacket pocket and found one of his cards, holding it up next to his license. The card was a little worn, but it clearly showed his name and the address of Chen's Auto Repair, along with a picture of a wrench. The woman squinted at the cards through the fogged glass. David could see her looking back and forth between his face and the license photo. After another moment, she opened the window a bit wider. "I'm Rachel," she said. "These are my kids, Sophie and Jake. Our car started making weird noises about an hour ago, and then it just died. The heat stopped working too." David nodded and moved closer to the car. Even through the window, he could feel how cold it was getting inside the vehicle. "How long have you been stuck here?" "Maybe an hour." "And a half?" Rachel's teeth were starting to chatter. "We were driving back from my mom's house in Riverside. The weather was supposed to be fine when we left." David looked at the front of her car and could see steam still rising from under the hood, though it was getting harder to see anything through the blowing snow. Looks like your engine overheated. Probably the radiator. That's fixable, but not tonight, and not here. A small face appeared at the rear window. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with wide, scared eyes. She pressed her hands against the glass and David gave her a small wave. She didn't wave back, just stared at him. "Listen, Rachel," David said, moving back to the driver's window. "I'm not going to lie to you. This storm is getting bad fast and it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Your car isn't going anywhere tonight and staying in it isn't safe." He could see the fear in Rachel's eyes grow stronger. "What do you mean it's not safe? The temperature's dropping fast, probably 15 below by now and going lower. Without heat in your car, hypothermia becomes a real problem, especially for the kids." David tried to keep his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "I've got a warm truck, and my shop is just up the road. You can wait out the storm there." Rachel looked, back at her children, then at David again. "I don't know you. How do I know this isn't some kind of trick?" David could hear the desperation in her voice. She was scared of the storm, scared of staying in the car, but also scared of trusting a stranger with her children's safety. He couldn't blame her for that. "You don't know me," David agreed, "but here's what you do know. I came out in this storm to help you instead of just driving home to my own family. I showed you my ID and my business card. And most importantly, you're running out of options here." He gestured toward the road, which was already barely visible. "Even if another car came by, which isn't likely in this weather, they'd probably be in the same boat you are. Cell towers are probably down, so nobody can call for help, and waiting for morning isn't really an option." A voice from the back seat said, "Mommy, I'm really cold." It was a little boy, probably 5 or 6 years old. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, and David could see her trying to make an impossible decision: trust a stranger or risk her children's lives in a car with no heat. "If I go with you," she said slowly, "what exactly are you offering?" "A warm, safe place to wait out the storm," David said. "My shop has heat, a bathroom, a couch, and a phone. That works. I've got some food and drinks there too. Once the storm passes and the roads are clear, we can figure out what to do about your car." The little boy in the back seat started crying louder. "I can't feel my feet, Mommy." That seemed to make up Rachel's mind. "Okay," she said, "but I want to call someone to let them know where I am as soon as we get to your shop." "Absolutely," David said. "First thing we'll do." Getting from the car to David's truck turned out to be more complicated than expected. The wind was so strong that David worried about the children being blown over. The snow was already knee-deep in some places, and it was coming down so hard that they could barely see from one vehicle to the other. David had Rachel and the kids gather their important things: purses, backpacks, a diaper bag, and some toys to keep the children calm. He helped them one at a time from the car to his truck, using the rope he'd brought as a guideline. Sophie, the little girl, was so scared she wouldn't let go of her mother's hand. Jake, the little boy, was crying and saying his hands hurt from the cold. David picked him up and carried him the last few feet to the truck, wrapping his own scarf around the boy's face to protect him from the wind. Once everyone was safely in David's truck with the heater running full blast, he could see how close they'd come to real danger. All 3 of them were shivering badly, and Jake's lips had a slight blue tint that worried David. "Is everyone okay?" he asked as he got behind the wheel. "I think so," Rachel said, rubbing Jake's hands between hers. "Jake, how do your fingers feel now?" "Better," the little boy said quietly. "But I'm still scared." Sophie hadn't said a word since getting in the truck. She sat pressed against her mother's side, staring at David with big, cautious eyes. "It's okay to be scared," David told them as he carefully started driving back toward his shop. "This is pretty scary weather. But you're safe now, and we'll have you somewhere warm in just a few minutes." The drive back to the shop was slow and tense. David had to focus completely on the road, following his own tire tracks back through the snow. The wind was rocking the truck and visibility was almost zero. "Is this normal for around here?" Rachel asked. "Not really," David admitted. "I've lived here 8 years, and I've never seen a storm come up this fast or get this bad. The weather. People sure got this one wrong. When they finally reached the shop, David felt a wave of relief. The building looked solid and welcoming with warm light glowing from the office windows. He pulled as close to the entrance as possible and helped Rachel and the children make the short dash to the door. Once inside, with the door closed against the howling wind, they all stood there for a moment, catching their breath and processing what had just happened. David turned up the heat and showed them where the bathroom was. "Welcome to Chen's Auto Repair," he said with a smile. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry, and that's what matters tonight." For the first time since he'd found them, David saw Rachel smile back. Inside the shop, the warmth hit them like a wave. Rachel pulled off Jake's wet mittens and hat while Sophie stood close by, still holding tight to her mother's coat. David flicked on more lights and cranked up the space heater in his small office area. "Here, let me take your coats," David said, hanging their wet things on hooks near the door. "They'll dry faster over here by the heater." The shop smelled like motor oil and metal, but it was clean and organized. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, and parts were sorted in labeled bins. Rachel looked around, taking in her surroundings. This wasn't exactly where she'd planned to spend the night, but it felt safe. "Can I call my mom now?" Rachel asked. "She's expecting us home tonight, and she'll be worried sick when we don't show up." "Of course," David said, leading them to his small office in the back corner of the shop. "Phone's right there on the desk. Take your time." While Rachel made her call, David turned his attention to the kids. Jake had stopped crying but was still sniffling. Sophie remained quiet, watching David's every move with careful eyes. "You guys hungry?" David asked, opening his desk drawer. "I've got some granola bars in here somewhere, and I think there's hot chocolate mix by the coffee maker." Jake perked up at the mention of hot chocolate. "I like hot chocolate," he said quietly. "Good man," David smiled. "Sophie, what about you? Hot chocolate sound good?" Sophie nodded but didn't speak. David could see she was still scared and unsure about this whole situation. As David busied himself making hot chocolate with the little coffee pot, he could hear Rachel on the phone. "Mom, we're okay, but we're stuck. No, the car broke down. There's a blizzard. A mechanic found us and brought us to his shop." Her voice got quieter as she explained more details to her mother. David figured Rachel's mom was probably asking a lot of questions about trusting a stranger. "His name is David Chen and he owns Chen's Auto Repair," Rachel continued. "He showed me his license and business card. No, Mom, I had to make a choice. The kids were getting too cold in the car." David pretended not to listen as he stirred powdered chocolate into hot water. He understood that Rachel was probably getting questioned about her decision, and he didn't want to make her feel worse about it. Jake wandered over to watch David make the hot chocolate. "Are you really a car doctor?" he asked. David laughed. "I guess you could call me that. I fix cars when they get sick, kind of like how a doctor fixes people." "Our car got sick," Jake said seriously. "Yes, it did. But don't worry. Car sickness is usually easier to cure than people sickness." Sophie had moved closer too, drawn by curiosity despite her shyness. "What's wrong with our car?" she asked. These were the first words David had heard her speak. "Well, I think your car got too hot," David explained, handing Jake a cup of hot chocolate and starting another one for Sophie. "Cars need water to stay cool, just like people need water to stay healthy. Sometimes that water runs out or leaks out and then the car gets a fever. Like when I had a fever last month?" Sophie asked. "Exactly like that," David said. "And just like you needed medicine and rest to feel better, your car is going to need some new parts and time to get fixed." Rachel finished her phone call and joined them. "Mom says thank you," she told David. She was really worried. "I bet she was," David said, handing Rachel a cup of coffee. "I called my wife earlier, but I should probably try her again. She's going to wonder why I'm not home yet." David picked up the phone and dialed his home number. It rang several times before Lisa answered. "David, where are you? I've been worried sick." "I'm at the shop, honey. I'm okay, but I'm going to be here tonight." David explained about finding the stranded family and bringing them to safety. "Of course you did," Lisa said, and David could hear both worry and pride in her voice. You couldn't just drive past someone who needed help. The roads are too bad now for me to get home anyway, David said, and these folks need somewhere safe to stay until morning. Are they okay? The kids? They're warming up now, a little scared, but they're tough. David glanced over at Jake, who was carefully sipping his hot chocolate, and Sophie, who was finally sitting down on the small couch in the office. I'll pack some things and try to drive over in the morning when the roads are better, Lisa offered. No way, David said firmly. Don't even think about driving in this. I'll be fine here and hopefully the storm will pass by morning. After David hung up, he realized he should probably figure out sleeping arrangements. The office couch was small, maybe big enough for the kids if they squeezed together. There was a cot in the storage room that he sometimes used when working late. But it was going to be a long night for all of them. I'm sorry this isn't exactly a hotel, David said to Rachel, but we'll make it work. Are you kidding? Rachel said. This is so much better than being stuck in a freezing car. I can't thank you enough. As the evening went on, they all started to relax a little. Jake found some toy cars in David's desk drawer, samples from parts suppliers, and was rolling them around on the floor making engine noises. Sophie discovered a stack of automotive magazines and was looking at pictures of colorful sports cars. Mommy, look at this red one, Sophie said, showing Rachel a picture of a Ferrari. That's a nice one, Rachel agreed. What do you think, David? Could you fix a car like that? I could try, David laughed. Though I have to admit most of my customers drive pickup trucks and family cars. I've never had a Ferrari in here. What's the fanciest car you ever fixed? Jake asked. David thought for a moment. Probably a 1967 Mustang. Classic car, bright blue with white racing stripes. The owner had been working on restoring it for 10 years. As they talked, David learned more about Rachel and her kids. She was a single mom, working as a nurse at the hospital in town. She'd been visiting her mother, who lived about 3 hours away and helped watch the kids during Rachel's long shifts at the hospital. Being a nurse must be tough work, David said. It is, but I love it, Rachel replied. I like helping people feel better, though I have to admit some days are harder than others. I bet. Especially with 2 kids to take care of on your own. Rachel glanced at Sophie and Jake, who were both getting sleepy. It's not easy, but we're doing okay. My mom helps a lot, and the kids are pretty good about understanding when I have to work late shifts. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and they could hear snow hitting the windows. David checked the weather radio and shook his head. Storms, not supposed to let up until sometime tomorrow afternoon. Are we going to be stuck here all night? Sophie asked. Looks like it, David said. But hey, how many kids can say they got to have a sleepover in an auto repair shop? Sophie giggled for the first time since they'd arrived. None of my friends have ever done that. Well then, you'll have a pretty cool story to tell when you get back to school. As the night wore on, David made sure everyone was as comfortable as possible. He found some blankets in his emergency supplies and set up the couch for the kids. Rachel insisted she'd be fine sleeping in the desk chair, but David convinced her to take the cot while he kept watch from his desk chair. You don't have to stay awake all night, Rachel protested. I'm used to it, David said. Sometimes I work late into the night on complicated repairs. Besides, someone should keep an eye on the weather and the heater. Before they settled in for the night, Jake looked up at David. Thank you for saving us, he said simply. David felt his throat tighten a little. You're very welcome, buddy. Sweet dreams. As the small family settled in for an unexpected night in the auto shop, none of them could have imagined how this chance meeting would change all of their lives. David woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of Jake whimpering in his sleep. The little boy was tossing and turning on the couch, caught in what seemed like a bad dream. Sophie was curled up next to her brother, sleeping peacefully, but Jake kept mumbling, too cold, and shivering even though the shop was warm. Rachel stirred on the cot and sat up when she heard her son. Jake, honey, you're okay, she whispered, moving quietly to the couch so she wouldn't wake Sophie. Mommy, I dreamed we were still in the car and it was getting colder and colder, Jake said, his voice shaky and scared. David got up from his chair and knelt down beside the couch. Hey buddy, you're safe now. Feel how warm it is in here? He took Jake's small hand in his. See? Nice and warm. Jake looked around the shop, taking in the soft lighting and the steady hum of the space heater. We're really okay? We're really okay, David assured him. The storm's still going outside, but we're inside where it's safe and warm. Rachel smoothed Jake's hair back from his forehead. David saved us, remember? We're going to be just fine. As Jake settled back down, David noticed Rachel watching him carefully. There was something in her expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation for how naturally he'd responded to her son's nightmare. You're good with kids, she said quietly, once Jake had fallen back asleep. David felt a familiar pang in his chest. Lisa and I have been trying to have kids for a few years now, he said simply. Hasn't worked out for us yet. I'm sorry, Rachel said. That must be really hard. It is what it is, David replied, but his voice was soft. We keep hoping. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm outside and the peaceful breathing of the sleeping children. David found himself watching Jake and Sophie, thinking about how brave they'd been through this whole scary experience. Can I ask you something? Rachel said after a few minutes. Sure. Why did you really stop to help us? I mean, you could have just driven past. Most people probably would have in weather like that. David thought about the question. My dad always told me that you help people when they need it, no questions asked. He said you never know when you might be the one who needs help. He paused. Plus, I served in the army for a few years. You learn pretty quick that looking out for each other isn't just nice to do. Sometimes it's the difference between making it home or not. You were in the military? 2 tours overseas. Got out about 10 years ago and used my savings to buy this place. David gestured around the shop. Always loved working on cars, even as a kid. My dad taught me everything I know about engines. Is he still around? Your dad? Passed away 5 years ago. Heart attack. David's voice got quiet. But I still hear his voice sometimes when I'm working. He'd have liked you and your kids. Rachel smiled at that. He sounds like he was a good man. He was. Worked construction his whole life, never made a lot of money. But he was rich in the ways that mattered. Always helping neighbors, always putting family first. As the night went on, they talked quietly about their lives. David learned that Rachel had been married to Jake and Sophie's father for 8 years before things fell apart. The divorce had been final for 6 months, and she was still adjusting to life as a single parent. It's scary sometimes, she admitted. Like tonight. Having to make decisions about my kids' safety all by myself. What if I'd made the wrong choice? What if you hadn't been who you said you were? But you didn't make the wrong choice, David pointed out. You trusted your instincts, and your instincts were right, I guess. But it's hard not having someone to share that responsibility with, you know? Someone to talk things through with when you're not sure what to do. David understood that feeling, though for different reasons. Lisa and I talk through everything, together. I can't imagine having to make all the big decisions alone, especially about kids. Do you think you and Lisa will keep trying to have children? We're talking about adoption, David said. We've been to some classes, met with agencies. It's a long process, but maybe that's how we're supposed to become parents. Around 5 a.m., Sophie woke up and climbed off the couch to use the bathroom. When she came back, she was more awake and curious about her surroundings. David, what's that big thing over there? She asked, pointing to the hydraulic lift. That's how I lift cars up so I can look underneath them, David explained. Want to see how it works? Sophie nodded eagerly, and David showed her the controls. He raised the lift about 3 feet off the ground, and Sophie's eyes went wide. That's so cool. Does it go higher? Much higher. High enough that I can walk underneath a whole car. Jake had woken up too and came over to see what was happening. Can you lift our car with that? I could once we get it here, David said. But first we have to figure out exactly what's wrong with it and get the parts to fix it. How much will that cost? Sophie asked. It was a very grown-up question for an 8-year-old, David glanced at Rachel, who looked uncomfortable. Well, that depends on what's broken. But we'll figure something out. As the morning light started to filter through the shop windows, they could see that the snow had finally stopped falling. The wind was still blowing, but not as hard as it had been during the night. Looks like the worst of it is over, David said, checking the weather radio. Road crews should be out soon. But even as rescue seemed closer, David found himself not wanting this time to end. There was something special about the way Jake had fallen asleep holding one of the toy cars, or how Sophie had curled up against her mother with complete trust. Something about the way Rachel had shared her fears and hopes during their long conversation. I should probably call my mom and let her know we made it through the night. Okay, Rachel said. While Rachel made her call, David started a pot of coffee and looked for something more substantial than granola bars for breakfast. He found some instant oatmeal packets in his desk drawer and figured that would have to do. Your mom is welcome to come here once the roads are clear, David told Rachel when she hung up. Though I should warn you, she's probably going to want to meet the guy who helped her daughter and grandkids. Rachel laughed. She already said she's cooking you dinner as soon as possible. She doesn't take no for an answer when someone helps. Her family. I'd like that, David said, and he meant it. As they shared breakfast and waited for news about the roads, David realized something had changed during their long night together. These weren't just strangers he'd helped anymore. Jake was showing him drawings he'd made on the back of old work orders. Sophie was asking if she could come back and see the car lift again sometime. And Rachel was talking about her job at the hospital, her dreams of maybe going back to school, her worries about giving her kids everything they needed. They felt like family, and David wasn't sure he was ready to say goodbye. By 10 a.m., the snowplows had finally reached their section of highway. David could hear the rumble of heavy equipment outside, and when he looked out the window, he saw county trucks pushing massive walls of snow to the sides of the road. Looks like we'll be able to get out of here soon, he told Rachel and the kids. But as David watched the road crews work, he felt an unexpected sadness. After spending the night getting to know this little family, he wasn't ready to see them drive away and disappear from his life forever. Rachel was gathering up their things when her phone finally got a signal again. It immediately started buzzing with missed calls and messages. As she scrolled through them, her face grew worried. Everything okay? David asked. My babysitter just texted. She can't watch the kids tomorrow because her own daughter is sick, and I'm supposed to work a double shift at the hospital. Rachel sat down heavily on the couch. I don't know what I'm going to do. My mom is 3 hours away, and I can't afford to miss work. Sophie looked up from the toy cars she'd been playing with. Are we in trouble, Mommy? No, sweetheart. Mommy just has to figure some things out. David could see the stress on Rachel's face. As a single mom, she was probably walking a tightrope every day, trying to balance work and childcare with no backup plan. What kind of nursing do you do? David asked. I work in the emergency room. 12-hour shifts, and tomorrow I picked up an extra shift to help pay for Sophie's school supplies. Rachel rubbed her forehead. I can't call in sick. They're already short-staffed, and I need the money. David thought about his wife, Lisa. Since she'd left her job at the hospital, she'd been looking for something meaningful to do with her time. She'd mentioned wanting to help families somehow, maybe even start a small business. This might sound crazy, David said slowly. But what if I talked to my wife about watching Jake and Sophie tomorrow? Rachel looked up in surprise. David, I couldn't ask you to do that. You've already done so much. You're not asking, I'm offering. David sat down across from her. Lisa left her nursing job a few months ago because she was burned out. She's been looking for a new direction. She loves kids, and honestly, I think spending time with Jake and Sophie might be exactly what she needs right now. Jake had been listening to the conversation. Would your wife be nice like you? David smiled. She's much nicer than me, buddy. She bakes cookies and knows all the good cartoons. I like cookies, Jake said seriously. Before Rachel could protest further, David was already dialing his home number. Lisa, the roads are clear enough for you to drive over here. No, I'm fine, but I want you to meet some special people. An hour later, Lisa's car pulled into the shop parking lot. David watched through the window as his wife carefully navigated around the remaining snowdrifts. When she walked through the door, Jake and Sophie looked up at her with curious eyes. "You must be Rachel," Lisa said warmly, extending her hand. "And these must be the brave kids I've heard so much about." Sophie, who had been shy with David at first, seemed to immediately warm up to Lisa. Maybe it was Lisa's gentle voice or the way she knelt down to talk to the children at their eye level. "David told me you helped them all night," Rachel said. To Lisa, "He's an amazing man." "He is," Lisa agreed, glancing at her husband with obvious affection, "though he has a habit of bringing home strays. Last month it was a lost dog. This time it's a whole family." "Hey," David protested with a laugh. "That dog found a good home, didn't he?" As the adults talked, Lisa naturally started engaging with Jake and Sophie. She admired Sophie's drawings and listened seriously as Jake explained how David had saved them from the storm. David could see the joy on his wife's face as she interacted with the children. "Lisa," David said quietly, "Rachel has a problem with childcare tomorrow. I was thinking maybe—" "Yes," Lisa said immediately, before David could even finish explaining. "Absolutely yes. But you don't even know what I was going to ask. You were going to ask if I could watch Jake and Sophie while Rachel works her shift at the hospital." Lisa looked at Rachel. "And the answer is definitely yes." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I can't let you do that. I don't have money to pay for babysitting right now, not with the car repairs." "Who said anything about money?" Lisa asked. "These kids would be doing me a favor. I've been rattling around the house for months with nothing important to do. This would give me a purpose again." Over the next few hours, as they waited for a tow truck to bring Rachel's car to the shop, something beautiful started to happen. Lisa and Rachel discovered they had a lot in common. Both were nurses, both loved helping people, and both understood the challenges of trying to balance work and family. "You know," Lisa said as they watched David show the kids how to check a car's oil, "I've been thinking about starting some kind of business. Maybe a home daycare or family support service." "Really?" Rachel said. "That's exactly what this town needs. There are so many single parents and families where both parents work, but there aren't enough good childcare options. The problem is I don't know anything about running a business." Rachel laughed. "Well, I don't know anything about starting a daycare, but I do know about managing schedules and organizing people. That's basically what nursing is." As the day went on, David could see the wheels turning in both women's minds. By the time the tow truck arrived with Rachel's car, they were deep in conversation about the possibility of working together. David examined Rachel's car and confirmed what he'd suspected. She needed a new radiator and some other cooling system. Parts, it would normally cost around $800 for parts and labor. "I'll pay you back," Rachel said when David told her the estimate. "It might take a few months, but I promise I'll pay every penny." "Let's work something out," David said. "What if you help me with some of the bookkeeping and customer service here at the shop? I'm terrible with paperwork, and Lisa's always telling me I need to get organized." "You'd let me work off the debt?" "Better than that. I'd pay you for the work. Good bookkeepers are hard to find, and you clearly know how to manage complicated schedules if you're juggling single motherhood and nursing shifts." 3 months later, David's shop had a new part-time office manager who had completely reorganized his filing system and improved his customer communication. Lisa had started Little Helpers Family Care, a combination daycare and family support service that she ran from their home with Rachel as her business partner. The service was exactly what the community needed. Lisa provided childcare for families with non-traditional work schedules, while Rachel used her nursing background to offer basic health education and support for new parents. Jake and Sophie had become regular fixture